Hey there, this is Raw Scissor, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places during runoff. Last week, we had Brandon Forbes on the show with USGS. He was here to talk about all things water, so we learned a ton about USGS's monitoring system, how we can interpret water data, and then also some stuff about runoff and what to do and not do when runoff happens. The big takeaway from that episode, if you haven't had a chance to listen, and I really do think you should go back and listen because it's a really interesting conversation with a really interesting guy. But if you didn't get a chance, the big takeaway is be careful with water, and especially high water. Okay, water is very, very powerful. These rivers are a lot stronger than you might think they are. And if you mess around with current that is 1,000 CFS when it's usually 100 CFS, even if you think that you're the best damn wader that's ever lived, you can go for a ride. It can be really, really bad. Every year, people die that way. It's not something that you should do. So, just as a baseline, you need to be careful with runoff. And if it is raging and things are horrible, the truth is you just probably shouldn't be on the water, right? Because you need to be safe, or at least you shouldn't be on that water. But then that leaves you with the conundrum, right? So you don't really just want to sit at home. You probably just got done fly fishing through April, and April is amazing. You're back on dry flies. You got bugs popping off everywhere. You're catching tons of fish. And then suddenly runoff comes along and just shuts everything down. And it can be really depressing because some people just look around and go, oh, well, I guess I can't do any more things now. And then they just stop fishing because they feel like they don't have a choice. But you don't have to stop fishing, okay? The runoff period is kind of an interesting time because you have April where you really get to do some incredible fly fishing, and part of March, maybe if you're lucky. Runoff starts in sometime in May. It's kind of hard to predict, but usually into April, beginning of May is when I would expect to see it really kicking off, and then it peaks toward the end of May or the early part of June. That's too early to do high-alpine lakes, right? So it might be tempting for you to be like, screw it, I'm going to go chase the cutties in those high-alpine lakes and those high-alpine streams. Probably not, unfortunately. It's still too early. Those are probably still frozen in a lot of cases, depending on elevation. The trails may still be snowed in. You just might not be able to get there. It's not the right time to go. That's usually later in July or August or September. And obviously those are usually, depending on how much snow is in the mountains, after runoff. So high alpine lakes are probably out. But that said, if you're creative and if you're willing to think outside the box, you can still go fishing even if it's not exactly the way that we usually talk about backcountry fly fishing. So today, we're going to talk about 3 ways to deal with runoff and fish through runoff so that you don't have to get off the water, and you can find some ways to stay on that fly rod, keep having fun, and bide your time until runoff is over and you can get back on the streams, or your favorite lakes ice off and you can get up to those. But these are the 3 ways that you can keep fishing through runoff. Let's go ahead and hit them. All right, number 1. You can fish low elevation stillwater. I know that a lot of fly fishermen are vehemently anti-stillwater. They think it's boring. They think fly fishing is just about fishing in streams and moving water. And they sort of, thumb their noses at stillwater anglers. Now, I think they make an exception for those of us who are doing high alpine lakes. That seems to be acceptable. But if you were to go fish a reservoir or a smaller lake that's at like 8,000 or 9,000 feet, or way below that, they might kind of look at you and be like, oh, no, I would never fish there. But that's a mistake because there are some really good lakes and reservoirs at lower elevations that are not impacted by runoff. There's still water. A lot of these don't have major sources of water flowing into them, at least not enough to blow them up. And they have some awesome fish populations. So as soon as runoff starts, I have that glorious golden month in April, then runoff starts. The very first thing I do is I start looking at lower elevation still water where the ice is off, the fish are feeding, and I can get out there and have some fun. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can skin this particular cat. And it's going to come down to how picky you are about fishing specifically for certain types of fish or trout. So I'm going to list out a few, non-traditional types of fish that you might go for and why you might go for those on these lakes. The first one is straight up stock trout. Now, listen, I know that you're all rolling your eyes at me and you're like, oh man, I thought this guy was legit and now he's talking about fishing for stockers. I get it. It's not something that I do on a regular basis. It's not something that I seek out. Stock trout are, the bottom of the hierarchy when it comes to fish. I would much rather be fishing for wild fish. But the reality is, if you want to go fishing and you want to have a good time, stock trout can still be fun, right? They still bend a rod. They're usually pretty spunky. If you're going to the right places, they can be pretty big. I mean, we have reservoirs here out west. Some of those stock trout are in there for a decade, and they're huge. I mean, these are like 20 plus inch fish, big old fat boys who live in the lakes where there's tons of food available. They can be a lot of fun. And if you're just looking to get out there, wet a line, and have some fun catching these fish, don't rule out stock trout. They can be a good way to stay in practice, stay connected to the water, just be outside, have a good time. Maybe you want to take your kids fly fishing. Maybe you have a friend who wants to go try it. Maybe you just want to work on your cast or a new pattern you've been tying or something else in a place where there's no pressure on you, right? You're not 10 miles off in the wilderness. You're just down the road or an hour away at this lake by a campground. That's perfectly fine. And there's no reason to be frowning at that if you want to go fishing. Now, is it the kind of fishing that I would want to do all the time? No, definitely not. Is it something that I would recommend as being, adventurous? No, definitely not. But if you just want to catch some fish and maybe practice some stuff and have a good time, and you would rather not sit at home biding your time until runoff is over, going out and fishing for stock trout in your local stocked lake or reservoir, it's not the worst thing you can do, guys. So keep that in mind. Just don't be too snobby about it because beggars can't be choosers during runoff. Now, here's the other thing, though, is that you don't have to fish for trout at all. And I know that that's kind of, what? But believe it or not, all those pictures that you see of people catching other species on fly rods, that could be you. You don't have to just fish for trout. And in fact, I find that some of those kind of middle elevation reservoirs, so I'm thinking of the ones that are sitting at, let's say like 9 to 10,000 feet, very often they are starting to wake up in May. Their ice is off or mostly off. They're starting to wake up. The fish are getting active. So not only can you go chase trout usually, but you can chase other species. My favorite species in the world to catch on a fly rod, and yes, even more than trout, these fish are amazing, are northern pike. They are the perfect apex predator. These things are like sharks or alligators. I mean, they even look like alligators. They've got these big, sharp teeth. They try to bite you. They're mean as hell. They'll just nail your streamers. I mean, they come up and hit those things. I actually read a book by Barry Reynolds about pike fly fishing. And he says that they hit it with bad intentions. And I think that's such an awesome way to put it because they're mean. And they will come up and they just slam those flies. And some of these fish are pretty big. I mean, I've caught pike here in Colorado, and Colorado is not a world-class pike fishery, right? We have a few lakes that have some pretty good pike in them, but we're not known for that. They're not native to here. Be that as it may, I mean, I've caught fish that are up to and maybe even possibly exceeding 40 inches, which, you're slinging an 8 weight or a 9 weight or a 10 weight, you're throwing big, ugly, feathery, long, sometimes articulated streamers that you would never get a chance to throw for trout. Not really. I mean, not if you're being serious, right? Maybe if you're just playing around. And you can have fun. I mean, I caught a flipping pike on a fly that I tied as a joke to look like the chicken from the movie Moana, right? For one of my daughters. And the pike came up and hammered that thing. I mean, when they're hungry, which is in the spring, that ice comes out, they move up into the bays where the water is warming up. They start getting ready to spawn those big, fat females. And it's usually the females that are the really big ones when it comes to pike. They start moving up into the shallows, and man, they are hungry, and they are mad, and they're ready to make babies, and it's a hard window to catch. I mean, I won't lie to you. I've had years where I get it just right, and I've had years where I completely miss it. It's a tough thing to time, but if you can hit that week or two window when they're moving up in the bays to spawn, and you bring your streamer rod and a box full of the nastiest meat you've ever slung, you're going to have a flippin' blast catching northern pike on a fly rod. So don't forget about other species. And it might not be pike. It might be bass. Largemouth are fun to catch on a fly rod. Smallmouth are fun to catch. Sunfish are fun to catch. I mean, any kind of panfish is fun to catch. Walleye can be caught on a fly rod if you're fishing kind of the dusk or early morning. You can get out there and chase other species. And it's an awesome time to just do something different. It's like a palate cleanser. It's just a little different than what you'd usually do. So don't rule out those other species because they can really help fill in that time when runoff kicks off. In addition to just being a ton of fun to catch. So keep that in mind. Now, the last thing I'll say about this first point, which is low elevation still water, is you can go kayak fishing, or as I like to say stupidly, flyak fishing. If you haven't been fly fishing on a stand-up kayak, you are missing out, okay? There is nothing like standing up on a boat in the middle of a lake like you are, the Lord himself, floating across the water and gracefully casting streamers or nymph rigs or dry flies or whatever you happen to be doing. It is an amazing feeling. You don't have to worry about your back cast because you're out on the water. There's nothing behind you. You can just play around. You get to be out on the water. You get to be in a boat. I mean, it is just a ton of fun. One of these days, I will do a full episode, maybe even a full season, about fishing from a boat and fishing from a kayak. So I'm not going to get into the details here today, but I will tell you 2 tricks if you're going to go kayak fly fishing. The first one is you're going to probably want a pedal kayak. And by that, I mean not the type that you row with your paddles, with your arms, but one that you use pedals on, like a bike. They have little fins underneath that go back and forth that propel the boat forward. Not only are they a lot easier to manage, but your legs are a lot stronger than your arms. These are much easier to cut through the wind with, and wind is a major factor, especially a safety factor when you're kayaking. So make sure you're looking at those wind forecasts, and we'll talk more about that in a later episode. But a pedal kayak is your friend. You want a boat that's long enough and big enough and stable enough that has a nice deck you can stand up on. You really don't want the sitting kayaks. I've tried that. Trying to fly cast when you're sitting down effectively at water level is not a lot of fun. You can do it, but it's not great. On top of the fact that I find that sitting in those boats all day gives me yak back, which is to say that my lower back is killing me from having my feet out in front of me. So if you're going to do this, do look into getting a good boat. Like I said, we'll cover all that at some point in a later date. But I have a 12-foot sit on top pedal kayak. And I love taking that thing out fly fishing during runoff. I have a blast with it. Even catching stock trout off of it, it's a ton of fun. If you catch a big enough fish, it'll tow you around the lake. It's a whole different layer and angle to fly fishing. And it is a ton of fun. So if you're looking for something to do and you just want to stay out there on runoff, break out a boat, man. Get out on that kayak, start fly fishing, do your thing. You're going to have a great time. But what happens if maybe you really, really don't want to do the still water thing? And I really strongly believe that you should. It's a lot of fun, but if you don't want to, you get to make that decision. But maybe you don't have other still water near you. Maybe for whatever reason, you just can't do this. I don't know what the reason might be. Regions vary, obviously, just like reasons vary. Maybe you still want to get out and do the streams. Or you're just a stream guy at heart, and that's okay. That's fine. If you're going to do that during runoff, you have to, number one, as I said earlier, you got to prioritize safety. Okay, you got to know that if you walk up to a river and it looks like a raging torrent of death, you don't want to get into that river. You don't want to do that. It could be very bad on a whole lot of different levels. You could literally die. Don't mess with raging water. It's not worth it. Okay, on top of the fact that it's real tough to fish, it's just not worth it to you from a safety perspective. But there are ways to somewhat mitigate that. The best way, this is especially kind of later in runoff. Early in runoff, everything's kind of blowing up and it's really tough. Later in the runoff cycle, though, things start to vary by elevation and by stream type. Very often you'll find that the main stem of a river is completely blown up. I mean, it might be 10x what it usually is as far as flow goes. Flood stage level flows, you just don't want to mess with that, right? But in a lot of the tributaries, so the creeks and the streams that come down and feed that main stem, runoff might be starting to subside, right? So in a lot of cases, there just isn't as much water coming into those tributaries, partially because, they're not a main stem in the river, so they don't have hundreds of big creeks feeding down into them. But also because they tend to be a little bit higher elevation, makes sense, right? Water flows downhill. And usually higher elevation starts to clear up a little bit earlier than the lower elevation because it takes time for all of that water to work its way down in the system and work its way out of the system. So very often, toward the latter half of runoff especially, this is a good time to go and check out some blue lines, right? So blue lining, a lot of you have probably heard of. This is finding a blue line on Google Earth or Google Maps or Onyx or whatever you use and going out and checking that thing out and fishing it. Some of these streams are sizable, 5 to 10 feet across. Some of them are tiny, a couple feet across. A lot of them will have fish in them. So if these connect to a main branch river or a main stem river that holds trout, there are probably trout in the tributaries as well. You can get out there and have a lot of fun blue lining these places. Blue lining takes a lot of preparation. Again, this is something that deserves its own episode, and we probably will do that at some point. I've done a lot of blue lining myself, and it's a ton of fun. Now, it takes a fair amount of thought, right? Both in terms of deciding where you want to go, looking at topographic maps, thinking about how you're going to get there, because a lot of these, some of them have trails, but not all of them have trails. And, you got to be able to figure out just from an access and a safety perspective how you're going to get there. But also, you don't know for sure what the water is going to look like. You could get there and it's much higher than you expected, in which case the safety rules apply, time to go home. Or you could get there and it's really, really low, in which case fishing might be tough. Or in some rare instances, this has happened to me before, you might hike in, get to a blue line, and find out it just doesn't have any fish in it. And that kind of sucks because you don't get to fish. But you still got to go outside, you still got to hike in, you explored a new piece of water, and now you know there are no fish in that piece of water, or at least it's not fishable for whatever reason. Too much vegetation, too small, whatever it happens to be. You can cross it off your list, right? Mystery solved. You can remove that question mark from the board and move on with your life. So it's not a total loss. You still learn something. But more importantly, you just get to go explore. And let's be real, this backcountry fly fishing thing, yeah, it's about fish, of course, but it's really about exploration. It's about going new places. It's about finding new water. It's about experiencing locations that are not often experienced by other anglers. That's the allure of it, right? You can go catch these trout at a big river everybody's heard about 10 feet from your truck. You can go do that tomorrow. There's a reason that we're hiking into these places to catch these fish, and it's not necessarily because of the fish, it's because of the places. And there is really no purer, truer expression of fly fishing exploration as blue lining. It's kind of the peak of the game. It's hard, it can be frustrating, but man, it's a lot of fun. And if you're trying to get away from runoff, getting up into those blue lines that happen to be tributaries of these larger rivers, or even tributaries to the tributaries of the larger rivers, can be a ton of fun. And it's a good way to spend some time outside, honing those hiking skills, honing those navigation skills, and just exploring new stuff. Now, a couple of necessary safety notes about blue lining before we move on. The first one is you really do have to prep for these. And I already said that. I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but I want you to hear it. You gotta prep for these. This is not like you wake up on a Tuesday morning and you're like, you know what? I'm going to pull open Google Earth and bang, here's a blue line, no trail. I'm going to go hit it today and see what it's like. It's not like that, right? You need to be spending time studying the river system itself, the flows in the main stem, that area, if there are flow stations or gauge stations on the tributary, what those look like, looking up any information that somebody might have posted about it, looking at satellite maps and looking at topographical maps. And for that, I use an app called Onyx Backcountry. I would love to have them on here at some point to talk about the app, but it's an amazing tool because you can get a 3D satellite view overlaid with topographic information that can give you a really incredible idea of the terrain around these streams, right? It can tell you how thick the vegetation is. It can tell you if you have to pass a boulder field or cross a boulder field. It can tell you if there are areas that might be particularly avalanchy because it can show you slope angle around you. It can show you nearby trails, even trails that might not be marked on other maps. And it can just show you in general what the terrain around this thing looks like from a steepness perspective, from a foliage perspective, from a environmental perspective. It's an incredible tool. I use it not just to look at this stuff, but also to plan routes. So the app will actually let you plot routes so that you can pull out your phone and follow those routes when you're off in the woods doing this thing. You can track yourself while you're out there so you can keep track of which route you took. All of that you can put notes down and markers down. It's an incredible app and an incredible tool. I use it all the time when I'm off in the backcountry, and especially if I'm doing something that is off trail, I have Onyx as kind of my standby. And the kicker is you can do all this offline. So as long as you remember to download the maps before you go out, don't forget to do that. I've forgotten to do it before, and then it won't work. Because if you don't have reception, you can't download things, right? You would think I would know that, being the sophisticated person I am, but here we are. You got to download it before you go. But as long as you do remember to do that, then you have this incredibly detailed offline map that you can access from your phone while you're off in the bush, even with zero cell phone reception. Okay, so prep is key. Make sure you've got the right equipment, the right software. Make sure that you've got your satellite locator and your satellite communicator with you, especially if you're off in the sticks. Tell someone where you're going. Make sure they can track your location. Have something that has an SOS feature on it. Bring your gear with you, right? If you're going to go off and do this stuff, it's time for you to have that backcountry pack back on you. We talked back in season 1 about the stuff I carry for day trips. Go back and listen to that if you want to. We'll do another episode or another version of that at some point, probably here in the near future. But treat these blue lining expeditions like real backcountry work, right? Go prepared. Don't go underprepared. Don't half-ass it. Don't be like, oh, it's just something I do during runoff. Like, if you're going to go off there in the backcountry, especially off trail, especially the places that are not often frequented, you got to do it right. So make sure you got the right stuff. Make sure you're prepped. And then, dude, go catch some fish. It's amazingly fun when you discover a creek that nobody's ever heard of. Trust me, it's the best feeling in the world. All right. And then number 3, finally on the list, is that you can attempt safely and without being stupid to fish the larger rivers during runoff. Now, I am torn on whether you should do this, okay? I tend to think that if the river is running at full flood stage, it's just not worth being on it, okay? From a safety perspective or from a fishing perspective, because it's real hard to fish rivers when they're flooding. But if you really want to, if you insist on going, there are a couple ways that you can do this. The first one is floating. Okay, you can hop in a drift boat or a raft if you're so inclined, preferably with somebody who knows what they're doing. Colorado doesn't have a lot of floating opportunities. I have been on float trips elsewhere, but I am not an expert on floating. I can kayak all day on still water, but I'm not a raft guide. I'm not a drift boat pilot. I'm not an oarsman. I've done those things, but it's not my jam. I am 90% of the time a wading angler, and the other 10% I'm probably on a kayak. But if you know what you're doing, or if you know someone who knows what they're doing, or if you want to hire someone who knows what they're doing, this can be a fun time to go float, right? You could fish, or you could just go whitewater rafting, I guess, and have a good time. But if you want to go book out a trip and get on a boat so that you can float over those crazy flows, knock yourself out. That is definitely one way to do it. It's not my preferred way to do it, but people do it. Something that you can definitely look at. If you are going to be on the banks, if you're going to be a wading angler, you're going to go try to fish this thing as a wader. Number 1, don't wade. Don't get in the water, right? It seems self-explanatory that you wouldn't want to get in the whitewater, but every year people die doing this. So please don't get in there. If you really, really insist on getting in there for whatever reason, you're going to think this is dorky. You might laugh or scoff at me, but you should wear a life jacket, a personal flotation device. Those rivers are no joke, man. And if you lose your footing and you fall into that flow, if you're not properly floated, you can have a really, really bad time and get yourself in big trouble pretty quick. So if you insist on doing it, wear the right safety gear, make sure that you're prepared. But assuming that you've done that, if you're going to fish it, how would you fish it? You're probably going to throw streamers, right? Let's be real. You're not going to attempt to fish a serious dry dropper or dry fly setup in that water. You might try to drop a couple into some maybe extremely rare sections of soft bank water. Maybe. You could maybe play around with wet flies a tiny bit. You could attempt to Euro nymph some of the less fast water, I guess. But probably you're throwing streamers, right? And chances are that you're throwing streamers pretty aggressively. You can throw them upstream and strip them back to you. You can throw them upstream and let them dead drift. You can throw them quartering downstream and strip them back to you. But in almost all cases, you're going to be throwing them up against the banks. The fish, just like people, don't really want to be out in this incredibly heavy current. It beats them up. It takes a ton of energy. It's not super safe for them. And so, they are hanging on the banks most of the time. So you can go out, you can sling meat at those banks, bring your 5-weight, bring a 6-weight, whatever you want. Throw some black woolly buggers. You can get fancy with this stuff and throw whatever you want. I tend to just throw straight up woolly buggers. I think that they are one of the best flies ever invented. I'll tie up some size 10s with a little bit of flash on them and a bead head, and they're good to go. And if the fish is going to eat a streamer, they're probably going to eat a black woolly bugger. You can definitely do all that stuff. Full disclosure, I don't have great luck doing this. I've tried it. Admittedly, I am not an amazing streamer fisherman in moving water. I fish streamers all the time in still water. I have great success with them. I do catch fish occasionally on streamers in moving water. The truth is, I just don't tie them on very often in rivers and streams. I just don't. Not because I don't like them, but just because I'd rather fish other ways. And I tend to believe that in a lot of instances, they're just not the most effective way to fly fish, to be perfectly honest. So I have done this. I have thrown streamers up against the bank. I have caught fish doing it, but it's pretty inconsistent, right? You're going to have to really work for those fish. You're probably going to have to cover a fair amount of water. You're going to have to be highly selective about where you're casting. And even then, you're going to have to make peace with the fact that streamer fishing is just different. It's harder. It produces less. The hookups can be tough if you don't have that strip set mastered. It can just be a little bit of a difficult thing for you to do. So I don't want to rule that out. I don't want to say it can't work. There's probably somebody out there who loves doing this and is amazing at it, in which case, shoot me an email. I'd love to have you on the show and maybe I'll learn something. But as for my part, I tend not to do this. I just want you to know it's an option. And if you really don't have another choice, or if you just really, 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 really want to fish that river during runoff, streamers on the banks, probably going to be your best bet. So that is 3 ways to deal with runoff and keep fishing. Here's a bonus 4th way that I bet you already thought of. So it's not super fancy, I guess, but you could take a trip. This is a good time to do adventure travel, right? So we're actually going to have somebody from Hatch Adventure Travel on the show to talk about how you book one of these trips at some point here in the near future. I'm taking a float plane trip up to British Columbia for 6 days at the end of July, which is going to be incredible. You can go do salt water. You can go do warm water. You can just go somewhere else if you want to. So if you were inclined to spend the time and spend the money to go and check out a different kind of fly fishing somewhere else, Runoff's a great time to go do that, right? Now listen, disclaimer, I'm not a saltwater guy, so I can't tell you if this timing matches up with like tarpon season or permit season or whatever. But I do know that there's probably somewhere that's not experiencing runoff where you can go fly fishing. And so if you want to get out and just do something different, you just say, I don't want to mess with runoff. It's a great time to hop on an airplane or get in the car, pack your fly stuff. We'll talk at some point about traveling with fly gear because that's a whole other thing. But this is a great time to do that. So don't rule out the screw you, I'm out of here option of just jumping on an airplane, going somewhere new and doing something exciting. Travel is definitely an option. And there's your bonus 4th. And I think that'll pretty much do us. This will be the last episode of the season, at least the last full episode of the season where it's just me with you guys. We have 3 more interviews to round out the season here with some really interesting guests. Those will start going up next week. And then when those are done, we're going to close out a very successful season 3. We're going to take a few weeks off as usual. And then we'll be back for season 4, which I will tell you more about at a later date. For now, though, I hope you're having fun. If you're listening to this during runoff, please stay safe, guys. I care about you, and I really don't want to read that news story. I think they're super sad. I hope you're having fun. I hope you're catching fish. I hope you're not sitting inside wishing you were on the water. And I'm looking forward to seeing you back here next week. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. Unless you fell off your kayak.